last month and appreciate all that you've done and that you were doing. The thing that you identified in that article that remains to be done is trying to get the Transit Workers Union to temper its demands. This is New York State Charter Amendment, history of arbitrations, kind of tough on management. Tell us, how do you plan to go about doing that, sir?
Well, I've made it a point to have a good relationship with John Samuelson, who is the president of the union, because I do think if you're ever going to negotiate something, you can't be enemies right from the get-go. So we've gotten an opportunity to get to know him. I'm not going to say we're best of friends. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think either one of us want it, but we do have an open line of communication. One of the things that we've built into our budget, which makes our budget quite risky, is that we have 3 years of zeros in our budget. And that was what the governor was able to achieve with the public employees, many or most of the public employee unions that have been settled in the Albany level for 3 years of zeros. It's something I lose a lot of sleep about, but I'm continuing to move in that direction. One thing I will tell you, and it happened just 2 days ago, the county executive of Suffolk County reached an agreement with the Suffolk County Police Department, the highest paid police department in the country, I might add, that they have accepted 2.5 years of zeros. For the first time ever, the Public Employees Union has agreed to not receive retroactive pay. They've been out of a budget, they've been out of a contract for 2 years, and they've agreed to not receive any retroactive pay going back for 2 years or for another 1.5 years. To me, that it's the tectonic plates that are, not the tectonic, right? Tectonic, excuse me. It just came up to tectonic, it's on my mind. But the plates moved, and it rarely happens, but that's an important part of it. So I actually will, my nightmare wasn't as bad last night as it normally is, knowing that their unions are starting to move and understand the economic problems that we all have in this country. I work at it every day. The one thing that you should know, and I think it's critical to this, I've always said, and I need to say this again, I don't negotiate in public, I don't negotiate, the press is here, so whatever I say will be reported, and then John will call me up and say, you broke your word again. I'm not negotiating through the press, I'm not going in that direction. John is up for re-election as well, and that plays into the dynamic as well. My hope is that sometime by the end of the year we will bring something to conclusion, as well as with the unions of Metro North and the Long Island Railroad, who are out of contract as well.
I heard you talking about numbers, your body temperature, and the on-time percentage, but let's add my blood pressure to those numbers, and they're over 100, I can assure you. What I want to talk about
120 over 80 is normal.
Mine's not, especially after listening to the discussion. My issue is one of the fairness of allocation of the subsidies. I represent a business that has 400 employees north of the Westchester County line, and we on a daily basis have to compete on wages with employees that commute to the city and earn significantly more. And we as a business in the Hudson Valley are subsidizing them going down there to the tune of over $100,000 a year in this MTA payroll tax. It seems to me not logical for that to take place. If those people are earning the high wages by going to the city, they should pay the cost of themselves going down there. Otherwise, if they weren't getting that subsidy and it was in their fare, they would be talking with me about working up here.
In the middle, it's part of the premise that is part of that. First of all, I understand the concern, and I'm sympathetic. I need to find a way to, whatever happens with the payroll mobility tax, to find a substitute for it that's more equitable and more fair. But one thing you should know is that the money, and there's been analysis done on this, sometimes it's been accepted, sometimes it's been rejected, but that the amount of money that's being actually used to subsidize or coming from the payroll mobility tax is not going to New York City. It's actually going to the counties, but whether it's the counties up here or the counties out on Long Island, they're not net funders to the subway system, and that's an important point I want to get across, because a lot of people up here, a lot of people around the state, and I believe this as well until I saw the numbers. A lot of people believe that the railroads are subsidizing the subway, and it's just not the case. It's just not the case at all. But be that as it may, I will work with Senator Saland, I'll work with the Assembly member on trying to find ways to make the payroll mobility tax or its replacement more equitable. We do need the money. As I mentioned before, there's no commuter railroad in the country that can work unsubsidized. So we need to find some form of subsidy that is more transparent, more direct, more equitable than the payroll mobility tax. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaking about fairness, what is holding up the counties of Dutchess, Putnam, Orange, and Rockland from having a full vote member on the Board of Trustees?
You know, it's a really good question, because I wouldn't mind at all if the state legislature changed the enabling legislation. When the authority was created back in the 1960s, when Governor Rockefeller was around, they created this quarter pounder situation. Look, the four members that represent the quarter pounders are some of my most active board members. I have no problem with it at all. The state legislature wants to give them an equal vote with anyone else. I have no problem with it at all. That's where it lies.
Mr. Loda, a few years back, there was talk of extending the Metro North service to the Rhinecliff station and possibly points north. Is there any work done on that currently?
Let me ask Howard Herman to answer the question, because I'll be real upfront with you. I don't know the answer. Whatever I say will be made up. So it's real important Howard does.
Right,
You know.
right. Yes, to speak to that, it is about 15 years ago there was conversation about Metro North going further north to Rhinecliff and Hudson. At that time, surprisingly, there was significant opposition, particularly in Rhinecliff, to having that happen. And that effort was ultimately stopped due to the political pressure and opposition to the project. Subsequent to then, the state of New York, who subsidizes the Amtrak service, has entered into a deal between Amtrak and CSX, who owns the rail line north of Poughkeepsie. And they're making improvements now, and at this point in time, we are working with them to make improvements in Poughkeepsie and between Poughkeepsie and Spike Duyvil, where we share the trackage. But at this point, the focus now is on the state is on improving the Amtrak service to Albany.
Last question.
Joe, this is actually to you, and let me see if I can do this quickly. The disability insurance retirement issue that occurred in Long Island Railroad, which seemed to be one of the worst cases of corruption in the United States, and yet, thanks to the administration that we have here, Howard is superb. We appear to be Metro North right on average, right where we're supposed to be. The concern is that as the head of the MTA, what is it that has a culture in one part of your world that is so different than another part of your world, and is it ultimately a fear or a concern of yours?
Oh, the culture between the Long Island Railroad and Metro North is night and day. And sometimes it's like the Hatfield and the McCoys. It is radically different. You should know that, and it's important to understand this, that the Metro North as well as the Long Island Railroad are part of the railroad retirement system, which is run by the federal government. The scamming that was done by the Long Island Railroad retirees, after they retired, they applied for a disability. They applied to a federal board. The federal board gave it to them, but there was collusion between these employees and doctors out on Long Island who were writing saying that no, their back was bad, or no, they couldn't lift things, or all that stuff. I'm not making excuses by saying that this happened after they were employees at the Long Island Railroad, because you're right, you went to the heart of it. What is the culture difference that allows this to happen? Well, you know, I think, you know, somewhere along the way, they all work with each other, they all talk about it, they all say a few years later, look, if I can get this doctor to say my back is bad, I can get additional amounts of disability on top of my pension. And that's what we did. What's important about this entire scandal is that it was the Long Island Railroad who uncovered it. It was the Long Island Railroad who brought it to the U.S. Attorney. It was the Long Island Railroad, in conjunction with the U.S. Attorney, that provided all of the data and information about the employees. their records while they were working, what they did, did they actually get hurt while they were on the job? Why is this doctor saying that it was a job-related illness? We were part of it. So Helena Williams, who is the president of the Long Island Railroad, has been instrumental in changing the culture of the Long Island Railroad. And for those of you you all work in some organization, you know changing the culture of any organization requires change agents and different ways of doing this. There's been pretty much a whole changeover of labor leadership as well as the Long Island Railroad, and that's encouraging. But the distinction between the two railroads, it's night and day difference. It actually goes back to New York Central versus Penn Central. It's a historical difference. If you read any history between those two railroads, they were completely different back then too. They were competitive and all kinds of things. So I'm aware of it. Thank you for asking the question.
How about a round of applause for our keynote speaker? I just want to remind you that right after this breakfast, there is a complimentary procurement seminar in the room adjoining this